Now we have a good line drawing for the frontal view of the sunflower, and we have a good drawing for the back view of the sunflower. Now the whole point of this lesson is to put them together in some sort of an arrangement. We have to think about how they're going to look on the page. With the two drawings separate, we can now move them around and see what we like. You can place your drawings in a horizontal fashion. You can decide whether you want them looking out or looking in on the page. But composition should be taken into account as to how this flower arrangement is going to work. Now I think that I am going to do mine in this fashion. So what I'll do at this point is I will tape these two together so that they cannot move, and then they can be transferred. Now my drawing is transferred onto my good drawing paper, but since the transfer is never very accurate, I have to go back and look at my photograph and see, or my good drawing, and see where I have to make some changes. I will start looking at each petal individually. So with my 4H pencil, I will start to draw again each petal and refine it with a very light line so that I have all the details that I need before I start to render. If you don't do this, your drawing will not be as accurate as it should be. Now at this point, I can very lightly put in some of these lines that create surface texture on each of these petals. As you'll see, I'm drawing very lightly so that if I need to erase something or if I need to change something, it's not going to be seriously affected. Now along the edges here where we have some very definite contours because of these little florets, we do need to be careful about how we do them. You don't want to just draw them in. You want to, at least on the edges, have good definition and replicate what you see here as closely as you can. It doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, but it shouldn't just be sketched randomly. You should look at the flower and see what those edges do, and that will be your basis for drawing in the florets once you start to render. So I will finish working on this, and then I want to cover certain aspects of the rendering so that you have a guide for how to handle certain parts of this flower. Now both flowers have been redrawn very carefully based on my photographs or my original drawings. So now we're at a point where we can start to talk about how to render the values. Because this flower has a lot of color to it, we had established that the basic local color for the outer rays was somewhere around 30 or 35%. And the center was somewhere around 70 or 80%. That means that we have quite a bit of darkness overall in this particular flower. That said, I think it's important to do the darks first. So I would start with the center of this flower, which is our darkest part, and then I would probably do the leaves next, and then finally the outer ray of petals, so that we can gauge just how dark to make these outer rays and not get them too dark and not be able to have that contrast between the center and the outer rays that is necessary for this flower. Let's take a look at this particular flower, because even though the angle is different and things like that, the dark center, if we squint at it, is quite dark by comparison to the outer flowers. So the way that I'm going to start this is by putting an overall medium tone of value into the center of the flower that I'm working with. Because this center is so dark, I'm going to start with the 3H pencil, and I'm going to put a medium tone of value into this area just to get it to the point of darkness that I really want it to have. where I have all these little curled shapes, I'm going to stay away from those for the moment until I have this center nice and evenly toned with a medium gray value. And the reason I'm going with a medium gray value is because all these other florets are much darker than the background on which they are positioned. So I'm starting with the background color first, and then I'm going to go to the florets. So at this point, I've filled in a nice flat gray into the center of this flower. And you can see we're only at about 30% here. If I squint at it, this is even 20%. So we could probably go considerably darker. This is 2 layers of value. And once I filled this all in, then I went back in and I started to fill in some of these little edge flowers so that we get that feeling of the texture from the opened florets on the outer edges of this center disc. I'm going to go even darker, and we're going to have to also put more darkness in the center of this flower because those are still a little tightly closed. So I'm going to switch to a 2H pencil to get a little bit more darker value. Now you can see where the 2H pencil really gives me quite a bit more darkness. And now that I have these outer little curls pretty much established, I can go in even with the 2H pencil now because I know where I want them to be. And I will fill this entire thing in with a layer of the 2H pencil. So here we have one layer of graphite for a number 2 pencil. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to darken this center section in here and let it gradually transition to this lighter gray section. I am going to go to an H pencil in order to create this nice center portion. Now, because of our scientific lighting, we'll have a little bit more shadow on this side of the disc. So we're going to put just a little bit more value into this area here. So now that this is done, we can start to put in some more of these little curlicues that make up the petals of the florets. And these are really quite dark. Because they are fully open, you don't see the Fibonacci pattern to them. But you do see, at least in my sunflower, you do see these little petals that make up these florets. And be specific about it. Don't just curl them in there. Look and see what they're doing on the on your reference to see what direction they take and how big they are and how close they are to one another, and follow that with determination. Don't just draw in shapes arbitrarily. Look and see what they do and try to replicate as much as possible that gesture that you see in the way that these flowers grow. At this point, I finished the center portion of this sunflower. I still may need to add more shading after I've completed the radial petals. And now I will move on to the bracts, because these bracts have fine hairs in them. And you're going to need to know how to handle those. Right in this area here, I have several brats that need to be rendered. I'm going to start with a 4H pencil this time because I want to start quite light and make sure that I am dealing with the brats and not confusing them with the petals surrounding them by filling these areas in with flat value again and going over the shapes in a very even manner.